listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, he's being called the political earthquake. We unpack the new wave in American politics, Zohran Mamdani, who is on track to be the new mayor of New York, and why the whole world is watching. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 26th of June. The first repatriation flight of Australians caught in Israel has arrived in Australia. Around 118 people were on board the flight that arrived in Sydney, with thousands more registering for help from the Australian government to leave both Israel and Iran. Many arriving back in Australia saying they have mixed emotions.
I'm still worried about my family in Israel, but I'm very happy to see my family here. I'm very happy to be back.
That audio thanks to Sky News. Meantime, the CIA has come out backing US President Donald Trump over his claims the US bombing attacks on Iran did damage Tehran's nuclear program. It comes after a leaked intelligence report from CNN and the New York Times yesterday disputed those claims from Mr. Trump and the US administration. With the ceasefire between Israel and Iran still standing at this stage, the US president told a news conference at the NATO summit the US bombings in Iran had ended the current Middle East war, and then made a bizarre comparison.
That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. That ended that war. This ended that with the war. If we didn't take that out, they'd be fighting right now.
The mother of murdered indigenous teenager Cassius Turvey has delivered an emotional speech in court as the three men charged over her son's death are sentenced. The 15-year-old was walking with friends after school in October 2022 when he was chased and savagely beaten with a metal pole. Ms Turvey telling the court, quote, "These young Aboriginal children were being confronted, chased and attacked, were racially vilified." 24-year-old Jack Brearley and 30-year-old Brodie Palmer were found guilty of murdering Cassius Turvey. 27-year-old Mitchell Forth was found guilty of manslaughter. And a 27-year-old woman has been refused bail after being arrested over alleged cyber hacks at her former university. Bertie Kingston has been charged with 20 offences, with police alleging she first exploited the systems at Western Sydney University to secure unauthorised discounted parking. Authorities then allege it escalated to changing academic results and then allegedly threatening to release and sell confidential student information on the dark web. Investigations are continuing. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the new force in world politics, Zohran Mamdani. He is making headlines and For You pages right across the world. And even today, he was described in a major Australian newspaper as, quote, the cricket-playing former rapper on track to be New York mayor. Zohran has shocked many seasoned politicians, showing people power is back.
In these dark times, I know that it is harder than ever to keep faith in our democracy. It has been attacked by billionaires and their big spending, by elected officials who care more about self-enrichment than the public trust, and by authoritarian leaders who rule through fear. We can be free and we can be fed. In our New York, the power belongs to the people.
Journalist Simran Pasricha from Pedestrian TV joins us to discuss why everyone is watching Zohran right now and what lessons politicians all around the world, including here in Australia, can learn from this changing of the political guard. Simran, thanks so much for joining us. The big question everyone is asking right now here in Australia and right around the world, who is Zohran Mamdani?
I like to call him the man who's making politics hot again. I feel like that's what keeps popping up on my For You page. But he did just win the Democratic primaries in New York yesterday. So very exciting. He is in the running to be the mayor of New York City. He was born in Uganda to Indian parents. Exciting to see a brown man so loved and so welcomed into the politics scene there. He's a rapper as well. I feel like that's important to know as well. And yeah, he is just everywhere. If you have even a remotely interesting For You page, you would have seen Zohran.
It's interesting you say it's making politics hot again. It's basically talking about the fact that so many people around the world are disheartened with the state of politics, even here after many elections, state, federal elections in Australia. But basically, it's interesting to note how he campaigned to win this to be a candidate to possibly be the next mayor of New York. He's proposed free bus services across the city, rent freezes and stricter accountability for negligent landlords, and also universal childcare for children aged 6 weeks to 5 years. He's basically reinforced to the whole world that voters, and especially young voters, matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so refreshing. I feel like a lot of the time our needs are seen as radical or too much, or that we're complaining and we should kind of just be happy with what we're getting and that we're asking for too much, when in reality, we're just asking to be able to exist in this world. And I think that he really heard that and reached out to the community. Like he, did a lot of campaign videos in different languages. Like he went through, all the boroughs and like spoke to people in the community. I feel like that was a really big difference that we saw with the other competitors. And so it was really refreshing to see how much he cared about his people in a really genuine way. And I think that's kind of what we're looking for in politicians now, that it seems genuine.
His victory, and of course we'll go through in a moment who he was competing against. It's Andrew Cuomo, who is very, very much an old school politician in New York. But it's interesting also to note that his victory is being called a political earthquake. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah. It's funny. Every time I see it's like a massive upset or like a political earthquake, it's funny that it's so jarring to so many people. And I would say mostly to the right, because a lot of his policies, just kind of focus on like everyday things that people are looking at. So would I call them that radical? Not really, because I think these are just normal everyday things that we need, like free buses make sense when cost of living is, like tearing us apart, city-run grocery stores, universal childcare. And I think people associate it with young people, which is like a good thing, obviously. But I also think he touched a lot of different demographics in his community, in his electorate, because I heard a lot about like grandparents who are still working because of the cost of living crisis, right? That like dynamic of a grandparent like looking after a child doesn't exist anymore, like it's very hard to obtain now. And so that sort of, like one example of the universal childcare can really help that dynamic, not only from, like a cost of living purpose, but also in a community sake, And so it's unfortunate that it's viewed so radical when it should be so normal. And I think especially in a time where every day you wake up and it's another conservative politician taking things away or making things better for a certain type of person, the elite, it's really refreshing. And so I guess it is an earthquake to like shake things up in a way that it's looking out for the everyday person. It's wild to me that seems so shocking,
So in regards to his main competitor, it was Andrew Cuomo, who was actually in the New York Democratic primary race to become the next New York mayor. Andrew has a very, one would say, pretty serious allegations made against him previously, but he did actually have endorsements from Bill Clinton and a mountain of centrist, or being called centrist donors. And then he still lost. And he even made a concession speech saying tonight is his night, referring to Zohran, saying he deserved it, he won. And it's estimated that Andrew spent $25 million and still lost.
Yeah, and I think that was on outside money as well. So like that is quite a significant amount, and to have, you know, that name recognition as well, like come with your platform. But yeah, it's quite shocking. And Mamdani's was very grassroots, and it was very, like, I think a big part of it was like TikTok powered, but I think again, it was just about connecting with what people actually wanted and like not being afraid to be out in community and to talk to people and to show up in places that might seem crass to a more like traditional group. Because I think I was seeing him all over my For You page, from, you know, like being endorsed by different like podcasts like the Celebrity Memoir Book Club podcast, or, you know, Emily Ratajkowski, like models. And he was on the subway, you know, doing subway takes, and he was like breaking a fast like on subway take to like talk about food insecurity, like these sort of things that like matter to people, and really putting a face to everything was really huge. And I think at a time when we needed that shift, it was just perfect, because now he's the face of this sort of generational and ideological shift in the Democratic Party, but also I would say just in politics in general, which I think is why it's mattering to so many people all over the world.
Simran, just on that point, why should this matter here in Australia? Because our last federal election saw the Liberal Party absolutely decimated. One may argue, like in the US, that Donald Trump, no matter how many people said or underestimated that he couldn't win, he did. And the Democratic Party ran an horrific campaign, one may argue, like the Liberals did here in our last federal election. So what do you think lessons, or what lessons do you think can be learnt by this case now unfolding in New York?
Yeah, I think people are very fatigued with the same old, you know? I feel like a lot of people lose faith in the system that we exist in already. And I think what Mamdani is doing well is that he's shaking up the system that we are forced to be in, you know? Like he's doing what he can within the framework and pushing the boundaries where he can. And I hope that that's sort of like a signal that, you know, you can run on big, bold, you know, left-wing ideas and actually win against the old guard, which is pretty huge. And I hope that it's sort of a glimmer of hope, honestly. And I think especially in these past 2 weeks, I feel like it was a glimmer of hope on our For You pages and hopefully, you know, in the wider world.
In regards to Mr. Trump, he has actually called Zohran a communist lunatic, and there have been critics coming out, just to, you know, devil's advocate, the other side of the argument, saying that experience matters. And as you mentioned before, Zohran was a rapper and has no, you know, history of political experience or leadership. Do you think that might play into his disadvantage? Do you think experience matters when it comes to leadership?
I think to a certain degree, but I would say, you know, Donald Trump, who is in his late 70s, I think, or is much older than Mamdani, I'm not sure that the amount of experience he has helped him so much in his career as a politician. I'm not surprised that he was so offended and maybe threatened by Mamdani's position and his win. He did this like similar things when AOC took office and throughout her time. And it's not surprising to think that something so helpful to the wider group and why the people would be so radical to him. But to your question, I think experience is important, but I think caring about your people and being open to conversations, with which Mamdani is very good at. Even in his speech yesterday, he said, you know, like, I'm open to speaking to people who disagree with me and learning from them, which I think is really huge, especially in regards to he's, you know, pro-Palestine. And so I think there has been backlash from a few like Jewish communities. And he's very open to learning about like the anti-Semitism that is taking place whilst not going away from his morals, or, you know, he's open to the conversation, which I think is important.
It's certainly an interesting time in politics. We really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That was Simran Pasricha. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natasha Belling. Thanks for your company.